Hi, in this topic we're going to learn about hypothesis testing. Uh, as the title of this topic implies, it's only an introduction. Hypothesis testing is a very widely used research method. It's a very popular method, especially for researchers who use empirical data. Now, very briefly, what's hypothesis testing? It's a method that starts by a researcher or a manager having a certain theory or opinion, and this is what we call a hypothesis. So we're going to learn how to test this hypothesis. All right, so it's going to be an introductory topic. Of course, we're not going to dive into the depth of hypothesis testing. This is something that you can learn more in more advanced managerial statistics courses. So this is what we're going to cover in this topic. You can see that we're not going to really cover much. So we're going to start by introducing you to the concept of hypothesis testing. And in fact, you'll be surprised that we're going to be talking a lot about the judicial system. Okay, what juries do in courts. There's a very nice analogy between what's happening there in the court and in the hypothesis testing that we use in research and in academics. All right, and this is where we're going to spend most of the time by testing population mean when the population standard deviation is known. All right, because I'm going to use an example where we know the population standard deviation, and I will be using this example in order to even reinforce more the concepts of hypothesis testing that I will start with. And finally, we're going to finish our topic with the cases when we don't know the population standard deviation. Okay, and we're going to use then the sampled standard deviation instead. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so we have learned hypothesis testing, in fact, is your second method of inferential statistics, because we have learned in the previous topic how to estimate the population parameter using the confidence interval, right? However, you should know that hypothesis testing is more used than confidence intervals. This is what we're going to learn in this topic. In fact, the underlying concepts of hypothesis testing is very familiar, and we know that there are so many applications, but a widely known one is the criminal trial, right? So unfortunately, we don't have it here in our country, but I'm sure that most of you watch movies where when a person is accused of a certain crime, they ask 12 persons selected randomly from the population to act as a jury, where they will listen to the lawyers who are or the prosecutor who is trying to prove that this defendant is guilty, and they will also listen to the lawyer who is defending that person, and based on that they will make their decision. All right, so in the judicial system, they make sure that when they select the jury members, they know nothing about the case. All right, so that's why in this system we have, or the people in the jury, they have two hypotheses. All right, two hypotheses, or as I said in the introduction, two opinions. All right, and it's very important for the system to work that they all start with what we call the null hypothesis. So this is now, I'm starting to introduce you to these key terms, null hypothesis. I'm going to repeat that very often. And we denote that by H0, all right? So we need the jury members to have in mind that the defendant is innocent. All right, you know that every person is innocent until proven otherwise. This is very, very important for a fair trial. And of course, it will be also a very important element for a fair research or for a thorough research, unbiased research. Now, there's an alternative hypothesis, right? So it's another opinion, which is the opposite opinion, where this will be our research hypothesis. This is the research question that the researcher will have or the manager will have, and we denote it by H1, all right? And what's that? It's the defendant. In this example, the defendant is guilty. Now, who has this one? It is the prosecutor who is trying to prove that this defendant is really guilty, right? Now, the jury does not know anything, okay, about the hypothesis, but they have to start with an assumption that the defendant is innocent. Why? Because this is very fair. And you will see a lot of analogy later when we dig deep into our research application for the hypothesis testing. All right, so now after listening to the prosecutor and to the defender, the jury members have to make a decision, right? So there is a decision that has to be made, and there are only two possible decisions, right? And this is applicable for our application in the academia and in the industry. Either they convict or acquit. There's nothing in between, all right? So either they find that the evidence provided by the prosecutor are very, very convincing, so they will go and convict the defendant, or they will find that the evidence was not really compelling and they will acquit him in this case. Okay, so let's see how or how to translate these terms that are specific for the trial into more general terms. So when we say that the trial or the jury has convicted the defendants, as I said in the previous slide, they convicted, that means their initial opinion that this defendant is innocent is not applicable anymore, right? Does not stand anymore. So in other words, we are saying that we are rejecting the null hypothesis. Remember, we say that we start with a null hypothesis, assuming that it's true that the defendant was innocent. So when we convict him, that means we have rejected the null hypothesis. Why? Because they believe that there is enough evidence that the prosecutor has presented to prove that the defendant is guilty, and that's why they convict him, and that's why they rejected then their null hypothesis. Okay, so what's very important here is that the jury will listen to the evidence, and the evidence is made to prove or to support the alternative hypothesis. And you'll see later that this is what we're going to do whenever we are doing a research in academia or in the industry. Okay, we start finding evidence about the alternative hypothesis, but we assume first that the null hypothesis is true. Now, the other decision, acquitting the defendant. Okay, what does it mean in the language of statistics? When we acquit the defendant, that means we did not find enough evidence. Okay, so there's no evidence, or the evidence provided by the prosecutor was not compelling enough. So we say that no, your evidence is not correct. So or they are not enough for us. So we are not rejecting the null hypothesis in favor of your alternative hypothesis, right? So we are saying that you did not provide us enough evidence. Now, the jury, remember, especially if you watch these movies, okay, the jury would not say that we found the defendant to be honest. They would not say that. All what they say is that we did not have enough evidence, and they will say not guilty, right, in the movies. And that's why this is very important, that whenever we do a research, we never say, okay, we never say that we are accepting the null hypothesis. What we do, we say that we do not reject the null hypothesis. Because why is that? Because we were not finding evidence about the null hypothesis. It's the opposite. We always go and find evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. Now, if this evidence is strong enough, then we say that we reject the null hypothesis. If the evidence is weak, we do not reject the null hypothesis. We never say that we are accepting the null hypothesis. All right.